Welcome to the Arena Decklist podcast. I am Brian Gottlieb, joined as always by Gerry Thompson. Wait, this doesn't feel right. This isn't usually how we do this, right?
This is backwards, but maybe it's correct, Brian.
Okay. It just struck me as very odd, but you're right. I do remember us discussing that we were going to do things a little bit differently this week, and I think for a really good reason. You have all been kept apprised of my travels across the country. They are mostly done at this point, but still plenty of complications to be unraveled. Still not a lot of Magic the Gathering games in my life, unfortunately. But where one of us isn't able to step up to the plate, the other one is always willing and ready. Gerry Thompson has been living on Magic Online, grinding out games with the absolute best deck in the format. I think it's indisputable at this point, Gerry. You're a food master. You're an Asmor aficionado, and you've spent some time bringing me up to speed. And I think the goal is to do exactly the same thing for our listeners today.
I think I've played more Magic Online since MH2 than I have in the last 3 years, maybe. It's been a lot. I haven't been playing food the entire time. I've been trying some other decks. I've also been drafting a decent amount, so I don't want to make it sound like I've logged, 1,000 hours with this deck or whatever. I haven't. All right. But I still know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I've spent some time watching your replays. You've played in multiple events, leagues. You've had extreme success. And I think the thing that is most interesting about the situation we're in is that you're not doing things the same as everyone else. You have some really strong points of divergence from the typical food plan. And having watched your games, I'm on board. I agree with you 100% the way you're building your deck. And I'm not really surprised, not to toot your horn here, but if I was to say a situation where I am most willing to just take your deck list blind and trust that you have one of the best decks in the room, it's essentially a scenario where the best deck is known, you've played it a bunch, you know your targets, and now you're just tweaking and tuning it and getting all these little things correct. And this deck just has the hallmarks of you've put in your time and you've figured out how to address everything going on in the format.
Yeah, and the thing is that this is almost certainly not the final form, right? There could be a better version of this strategy out there. There could be just a better green-black food deck out there, or better sideboard plans, what have you. And obviously things are probably getting worse before they get better as far as how hostile the metagame is towards you. But right now I like my spot, and especially over the last week, I think that I've hammered out some pretty reasonable sideboard plans, and I've certainly done my research and gone through every possible card or whatever. And I'm kind of at the point now where I'm starting to work on other versions just to see if they have legs too, because I'm not really the type of person to grind a deck just to get moto rich. You know what I mean? It's I
Sure.
learned what I wanted to learn, and now I'm kind of ready to move on. But if there was a big tournament, a PTQ, or the challenges even, I think are pretty good places to just be all right, I'm going to put my head down, play the best deck, and just try and get some money, buy some Ragavans with it or something. I would be playing this deck for sure.
Yeah, I would snap off this deck in a second. I agree with you. Gonna hit you with the list in just 1 second. But before I do that, I just want to make my stance clear. I think this is the Hogaak of MH2. It is so diverse, and its game plan's so uniquely powerful. It feels like it's operating on a different level than the rest of the modern format at the moment. Maybe it'll be attack. Maybe we'll find even more busted things to do. But I think we found PowerPoint number one. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So people have seen these Golgari food decks, and I think that those decks are fine, but they all kind of have the same problem where they run out of gas. And if you're able to keep an Asmor on the battlefield, maybe you have Finale of Devastation to get more Asmors or whatever, that's fine. I think that's a solid plan. This deck doesn't really run out of gas, and I think a lot of the decks that people have been trying to beat up on food with have been like slower controlling decks. Basically just like decks that go over the top, right? Like any sort of control deck, Niv Mizzet decks, Amulet Titan, those sort of things. And a lot of those decks actually just fold to Trail of Crumbs. And for whatever reason, people are not playing this card, and I don't get it. It happened the same way in Standard, man, right? Where like people just didn't play Trail, maybe sideboard some copies, and it was like, oh yeah, we play 4 of this main.
Yeah, I do remember that evolution happening there as well. We're going to talk plenty about Trail of Crumbs. I want to start with the deck list, though, for people who are listening at home. Just real quick, we're looking at 4 Gilded Goose, 3 Cauldron Familiar, 4 Asmors, 4 Oval Chase Daredevil, 3 Feasting Troll King, 4 Street Wraith, 4 The Underworld Cookbook, 3 Witch's Oven, 4 Trail of Crumbs, 3 Bone Shards, 1 Springleaf Drum, 4 Urza Saga, of course, 4 Darkboar Pathway, an Urborg, 2 Swamp, 2 Forest, 2 Overrun Tomb, 4 Verdant Catacombs, 4 Blooming Marsh. We'll talk about the sideboard when it's time to discuss sideboarding, but I wanted to be clear about the main deck to start with. And the first thing I want to delve into with this deck is just talk to me about what you're doing here. Like what are the game states you're trying to reach? What are the points where you are advantaged against the rest of the format? Like we know the major players, we know the cards that matter, but talk more about the game states you're working towards when you're using these cards.
Your deck is just like overwhelmingly 1 mana cards. So you're definitely looking to mulligan fairly aggressively to make sure that you're doing stuff on the first few turns. And it could be as simple as just like playing Cauldron Familiar, playing Witch's Oven, and maybe a Trail of Crumbs to go along with it. But a lot of your best draws, your most explosive draws, involve the Underworld Cookbook alongside Oval Chase Daredevil, so that you're able to just continually generate food. And then eventually you'll find something to do with it, whether it's like Asmor, Feasting Troll King, maybe Cauldron Familiar plus Trail of Crumbs somewhere later on down the line. Maybe it's just like pumping the constructs you get off of Urza's Saga. So that's basically it. The sequencing really depends on what your hand looks like and what you figure out your opponent is playing, just based on what they do in the first couple of turns and how you go from there. One thing that I have found to be mostly true across a lot of different matchups is when I first started playing the deck, I was like, yeah, jam out Asmor, jam out this 3/3. And now the more I play the deck, the more I'm sandbagging it until I can actually get value from it. So if, say, I have an opening hand that has a Street Wraith and no turn 1 play, I might not be cycling the Street Wraith. Maybe I'm going to wait. But certainly if I have like an Underworld Cookbook, which means that I'll have a discard outlet to play Asmor later, then you can just fire off the Street Wraith and like try and dig for a Gilded Goose or something to do on turn 1. And then there's like the decision for how all in you want to be as far as like when you bring back your Feasting Troll King and stuff like that. I mean, you have draws that can enable it on turn 2, but maybe it's like turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. It's a little bit later on down the line. Maybe you want your food because you're about to be making some constructs and you want them to be a little bit bigger or whatever, you know? Again, a lot of these things are just context dependent.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about this deck is I think it plays in so many situations so well. And if you're familiar with these cards, either through their standard lifespans, you know how the Jund Food decks will get to this point of inevitability where they're just able to keep looping their Cauldron Familiars over and over, and they're drawing a card every time, and the advantage just snowballs out of control. This deck does it 10 times harder than those decks ever did. But the really great part about this deck, I think, is its capacity to just have explosive starts with basically no resource investment whatsoever. Like I actually want you to tell the story of a replay we watched right before the podcast. Your match against a basically Rakdos mid-range deck that had an amazing start, and you very quickly invalidated it.
They played a turn 1 discard spell, turn 2 played 2 discard spells, turn 3 played a Dothy Voidwalker, and, you know, admittedly missed a land drop, right? My hand at this point is all lands. My battlefield is all lands. And all I did was play Saga on turn 2, make a token on turn 3, make a token turn 4 on my upkeep, go get a cookbook, play another Saga, just immediately start discarding like my access lands to cookbook, and I just killed them with like a pair of 6/6s.
You won easily. And
Easily.
they played a Croxa like in the mix along there, and then they played a Liliana of the Veil as well. So
Yes.
It's not like they ran out of gas at that point. They were doing the things their deck was supposed to do at every single point of the game. Your deck failed to function, and you blew them out of the water with your Urza Sagas. And I've like not only that scenario where you're resource light, but I saw scenarios where you just assembled an army really quickly, usually based on like Asmor off a Street Wraith cycle, and you get your cookbook, and Saga's your next land drop, and just turn 4, turn 5, you have lethal presented, or maybe you just turn 2 Feasting Troll Kings. Like you have access to these really, really explosive starts that usually a long game deck like this, you wouldn't expect them to have access to.
So the problem that I found with a lot of the green-black food decks was you say like you draw an Urza Saga, a cookbook, an Asmor, a Troll King. Like if they deal with your threats, you know, you're presenting like 4 threats. It's not like that absurd. And you could be like, you know, plus or minus a threat, whatever. But it's not that difficult for like a control deck or like a Rakdos midrange deck or something like that to deal with those threats. And then you just have no engine. You have nothing in place. You have, you know, like some cookbooks, some foods, maybe like a witch's oven or whatever. And you are just relying on the top of your deck to keep those threats coming, right? And Trail is where you just get to switch gears if you want to and just start drawing cards and bury them. And I think this deck is really good at using all of its mana for like the first 4 turns. And then you just kind of sit there and do nothing unless you are very fortunate, draw like multiple Urza Sagas and things like that. And people have mostly picked up on that, and they're like playing Life from the Loam, or Finale of Devastation is another one where it's like, okay, here's like more copies of Asmor, so it's more gas and can potentially scale the longer you go and stuff. But they're just like these one-shot effects, or in the case of Life from the Loam, makes you even more susceptible to graveyard hate, because people love bringing in like Rest in Peace and Leyline, and you just like don't even care about that stuff really. And Trail certainly helps with that, where, you know, instead of using Daredevil to discard cards, you just trail into cards and discard them. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. So the Feasting Troll Kings and like the graveyard interaction, it's really funny to me because it just kind of like throws the opponent off the scent of what truly matters, where you have the capability to turn to Troll King, but I don't even want those draws, you know? It's just like, I want it to be there to be threatening to my opponents so that they'll like bring in Leyline against me. But I'm just going to trail everyone inevitably.
Yeah, your better draws have a bit more pace to them. And again, I think that's what makes the Hogaak call out appropriate. Like certainly it was a little bit more in Hogaak's case slanted towards, yes, I can do busted things out of my graveyard. That's where that deck was supremely powerful. But we know what the metagame evolved to, where it was very Leyline focused, and main deck Leylines became a thing. And it didn't matter because you had access to your Convoke starts, or you could, you know, just do a beatdown plan. And I think this deck is doing the exact same thing, where if you try and go after, say, graveyards, or if you try and go after your opponent on the artifact side of things, where you just want to restrict them from keeping a massive artifacts in play, that's fine. That's a good speed bump. But there's other ways they can go about challenging you, and Trail of Crumbs seems to even further that game plan, where you're just not vulnerable to these attrition-based strategies anymore on your opponent's part. You will outvalue them. Again, another replay that we watched together, you against Niv, where Niv puts just tons of cards into their hand, basically has the perfect start, multiple Bring Delights, doing whatever they want. You outvalue them easily off the back of Trail of Crumbs, just resource after resource coming off the top of your deck, and there's really nothing they can do about it.
Well, let me talk about that game actually, because it was kind of interesting, where I had the ideal start. I had like cookbook into Asmor, and I just jammed it in. The card I discarded was a Feasting Troll King, and I just like lost my early start to a Kaya's Guile, which, you know, had I been more familiar with like the format and just getting used to those play patterns, I would have just never made that play, and I would have held my Asmor until I could get value out of it. So like that's one of those instances where I think just jamming it was probably pretty bad, because I had options too. Like I had a Trail, I had an Urza Saga, you know. I very easily could have done other things and just held Asmor so that I couldn't get put under pressure and just sat there and worked my trail, So they like Kaya's guiled me a couple times. They played turn 4 Niv. I think they drew like 5 cards off it. It was like another Kaya's Guile, Dreadbore, Teferi,
Yep.
Renin 6 or something, all these cards. Oh, there's a General Ferris in there.
Yep.
So the turn after they Niv, they Omnath, and then General Ferris shortly thereafter. They end up with like 4 tokens. And at this point, like I lost my Asmor. I made some tokens with Urza Saga. Those got killed by the Kai's Guile and stuff. And they just like amassed this huge army. Thankfully, I found a Cauldron Familiar so that I could discard it to Cookbook and sacrifice it to trigger Trail on the cheap. Because if I were stuck paying like 3 mana to like crack a food and pay for Trail, I probably would have been too slow, right?
Yeah.
And then the Familiar also allowed me to like block Omnath and stuff like that. And then it just got to a point where on turn 7 or something, I finally found an Asmor and I had 8 food. I just killed all their stuff and drew a bunch of cards. And then from there, they were just kind of like backpedaling. Like, what do you do, right? Like they Niv, they drew 5 cards. They used those cards to deal with like the resources that I was generating. And then they were just out of gas.
Yeah, and your gas continued for the rest of the game based on Trail of Crumbs. And I think more copies of Trail of Crumbs joined the fray. And it just became very clear that any deck trying to challenge you via traditional means couldn't. It just wasn't going to happen. You had access to too many resources. Oval Chase Daredevil got into the fray and things were over from there.
Yeah, you kill them with whatever. And the alternative plans like Life from the Loam, Finale, I would have lost to their turn 4 Niv for sure. And
100%.
I mean, you can make the argument that like, well, if I would have played correctly and like held my Asmor, I could have killed the Niv. Yes, but like they still would have ground me out with all the cards that they drew, right? But Trail was just this thing that was in play, generating like a ton of resources. And there was a moment like a few turns after that where they did cast Bring to Light for 5, and the best thing they could get was like an Abrupt Decay, right? So like that is definitely a thing that they should be aware of. Where so like my opponent, for example, had a main deck on Mordigo. Well, that card is almost certainly worse than like a Creeping Corrosion or Fracturing Gust in current Modern, right? So I think that if that game went on and they Fracturing Gusted me, that I almost certainly lose the game because it was like the turn before I found Asmor.
Yeah, a good takeaway for sure, especially if you're going to find yourself on the other side of things. If you are the type who wants to challenge this deck, more power to you. I will not be doing that. As long as they let me play with this deck, I'm probably going to do so, assuming I'm playing like a high value event. But certainly someone's got to be out there trying to fight against it. And I think identifying these small points are good, but you can't rely on one card to do the job. You have to have a multifaceted game plan against this deck.
Yeah, and this Niv deck was not the only deck that I played that was trying to do that stuff. Like I've played against Esper Control and similar things, and even against like the Cascade decks, like cascading into Crashing Footfalls, like they're making some 4/4s, they're blocking, they're like brazen borrowing your tokens and everything. Like if you don't have anything, they can just grind you out, right? And I've been able to do well against decks like that with things like Trail too. So Trail has not felt slow. It is not like Standard where you will have to like pay 2 mana to sack a food in a lot of instances, because you have Cookbook, which allows you to discard the Troll Kings, and you have Asmor and Cauldron Familiar. Like you have plenty of ways to just sack the food without paying the 2 mana. So Trail is like fairly mana efficient for what it does too. And like obviously there's Gilded Goose too. So
yeah, like I said, this is probably the biggest point of divergence between you and other people playing this deck. I am so firmly on your side with this one. Just if you haven't tried Trail of Crumbs and you're convincing yourself it's not good, or you like some other plan better, play a few games with it. And I can't imagine you come out on the side of, oh, I don't want Trail of Crumbs after that.
Well, I would not recommend just like playing 2 Trail of Crumbs. I would recommend trying to like build your deck around it. Right.
Yep.
And, play Trail on turn 2. So like Urza Saga, right? Like you want to play whatever 1-drop you have, Saga on turn 2, so that you can activate it on turn 3 and turn 4 on your upkeep. Yep. Right. And that means that you want something else to do on turn 2. Well, Trail of Crumbs is pretty good. And then once the Saga goes away, you're going to want to like find additional land drops and find other things. You're going to have things to do with your mana once the Saga's gone. And like Trail is perfect for that. So Trail works really well with Saga for a lot of reasons. Like it keeps feeding you lands, keeps feeding you artifacts, keeps feeding you like more Sagas. And if you just like play 2 Trails in your deck, and like, you know, maybe you're not playing a lot of Witches Ovens or Cauldron Familiars or whatever, then you're probably not going to have like the full experience that I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also think your sideboard is very well built to take advantage of Trail of Crumbs, but we're going to save talking about that until we actually get to the sideboarding section of this here breakdown. Anything else you want to say about Trail before we move on to some other points with the deck?
It's just really good. I don't know what I can possibly say or do to try and convince people. It's just like games of Modern can go very long, and you know, Trail is just there to bail you out. It gives you inevitability, and like, say the game is fast, and you know you're not going to like use it for anything. Well, you're probably going to end up pitching like a non-Daredevil card to a cookbook at some point, right? So. Right. It's not like you don't have ways to like utilize this extra piece of cardboard if it's not serving you, because the entire deck is that. You know, like the second Troll King's not good, the second Daredevil's not good, whatever. Like you either find ways to use them, or it just means that what you're doing is working and you don't need them. So I really don't know what the aversion to it is. It doesn't make any sense.
Right there with you. Let's move on. Let's talk more about Urza's Saga. So this is the deck that is the Hogaak of the Modern Horizons 2 format. I don't know which card is actually the Hogaak, though. It might be Asmor, or it might be Urza's Saga. I think you can make a case probably for Urza's Saga a little bit better, because it's finding play in multiple places and feels like it is the format definer, and I'm not sure that Asmor would really work without it. Like, so much of the deck is built around using the mana efficiency that Urza Saga instills in your mana base, and then taking advantage of the holes elsewhere with the 1-cost options you have all over the place. So certainly this is as vital a part of the strategy, despite the fact that it's not a food card. We discussed last week how we were deceived by Urza Saga at first, and we still thought it was very good. Once you realize you can make 2 constructs, this is a bonkers card. The output from this card as a piece of your mana base, like just getting these, I don't even know how big these constructs are on average. I saw a lot of your games start with 6/6 and 7/7 constructs, because your turn 1 Witch's Oven, and then turn 2 is Saga Time, and Trail of Crumbs comes along, and then there's a construct and another construct, and all of this time Underworld Cookbook might be in the mix, making more food. These tokens come down very large. I think that part is indisputable, but what's more interesting to me about your list is the targets you've chosen. And there's a few across the deck and sideboard. Do you want to hit on those? And then we can talk more about anything you want to say in regards to construct play patterns as well.
Yeah, I think 6/6 is pretty normal, at least in this deck. I mean, if you're playing a non-cookbook deck, I think your constructs are going to be smaller on average. Like maybe you just have some Mishra's Baubles and whatever tutor targets you have that are not like terrible to draw. And maybe you're making some 4/4s, but I think that's completely fine. So they're certainly overperforming in this deck because you have cookbook just making a bunch of resources. Yeah, like from my experience, it's just been like you make construct, your Saga goes off, you're searching for a 1 or a 0 mana artifact. What do you want in a lot of these different scenarios? And in the vast majority of the scenarios, it's just like, well, I want more artifacts to kill my opponent faster.
Yeah, more cookbooks.
Yeah, so cookbook is it. I mean, if you have a cookbook already and you don't have a Daredevil, then maybe you don't have enough resources. So then maybe you get a Witch's Oven, which means that if they kill one of your constructs, then you're probably getting 2 food out of the deal. And, you know, maybe that's
goes big. I mean, that's a real game changer. It sounds like a small thing, but it's not. No,
it is, because that's like almost a Feasting Troll King, and it's a lot of Cauldron Familiar triggers, and it's an Asmor activation, you know? It +2s or a +1s, I guess, your other one. because you lose the construct, but you gain a food, you know?
Right.
So it's still pretty good. And then in a lot of these scenarios, it's like, yes, I could see merit for a Pithing Needle or a Nile Spellbomb. Shadow Spear is one of the cards that popped up that I do think is really, really good, because then it gives your construct lifelink and trample. So against any of the like Ragavan,
Yep.
Dragon's Rage Channeler, like against humans, against any sort of deck like that, normally they can just be like, okay, whatever, I'll just, block your construct and attack around it. And Shadow Spear makes that not really possible. So the Shadow Spear is really good in those matchups. And right now it's like, I don't know, 15% of the overall metagame. So I don't really see a reason to play it main deck, but it's definitely in my 75. So
Yep.
I think it is that strong.
Yep.
And the same could be said for like Needle and a Graveyard Hate card, where like, do decks exist where these cards are good against them? Like, yes, but not so much that I want to just naturally draw that card in game one, And obviously these things are going to change as the metagame evolves and everything. So feel free to play whatever you want main deck if you feel like it is going to increase your win percentage. But for me, I'm just like bare bones with cookbooks and Witch's Oven, and then I have a single Springleaf Drum.
Is anyone else doing this, or is this kind of a you thing?
Yes, I picked this up from a lot of other people, where at first I was like, this is kind of silly, but I think it makes sense with exactly Trail of Crumbs, because your Saga goes away, you're down a land, and then if your opponent fights through that, that's typically when you start trailing. So being down a land actually sucks a lot. But since you have, Cauldron Familiars running around, and the turn the Saga goes off, you have the construct untapped with Summoning Sickness because you made it during your upkeep. It's like, yeah, you get some of that mana back, and that's actually really relevant in a lot of situations. So the one Springleaf Drum in the version where you're playing 4 Trail of Crumbs makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if you're playing a blue Urza Saga deck that is trying to get to Urza, because, again, your Saga goes away. You kind of want to get to that 4 or 5 mana threshold. And if you are not playing an engine, then the drum doesn't really make any sense, because you don't have a whole lot to spend your mana on anyway.
Any other cards that you dabbled with and discarded as not good enough as Urza Saga targets?
God, I don't know. There's so many. Like, you could make an argument for having a redraw with like Mishra's Bauble, and it's a 0 mana card. So like, how bad is it if you naturally draw it? You have to maybe get a little look-see in with a fetch land or something. Like it's exactly fine, but basically, like, when your Saga's going off, think about what you would actually want to get in that scenario, not just like, oh, this is a very small corner case, but like, if a situation is coming up over and over and over again where you need to get Shadow Spear to race or whatever, like, get that thing in your main deck. Absolutely.
Makes sense to me. One more card I want to check in on your main deck before we start talking about sideboard and stuff. Bone Shards. That's the removal spell of choice here. How much of that is influenced by the fact that you were looking for additional discard outlets for Asmor? How much of it is it just you have this fodder laying around all the time, so this is just a really good removal spell in your deck?
That is a good question, the first part of it, for sure, because you play 4 Street Wraiths, you play 4 Cookbooks. Is that enough for Asmor? In my experience, it has not been. And I don't know how many more things you need after that, but obviously, if you can work some into your deck without it feeling like really bad, then that's great, because then that card is going to be online a lot more consistently. And Bone Shards has felt really good for all of the reasons that you noted, where, you discard a Daredevil or a Feasting Troll King, you just immediately get it back. Like, the discard is not really that much of a cost unless they're actually attacking your engine pieces. But in that instance, you have like this very cheap removal spell that keeps a clock off you and gives you a bunch of time to actually rebuild. So it's still completely fine. It goes after Planeswalkers, which I think is also very good.
Yeah, good in the format right now, it feels.
So you could do stuff like, oh, I'll just play Fatal Push or whatever, but Bone Shards kills way more things. And I think that that's valuable. I think that, having another Discord outlet for Asmor is certainly very beneficial. And you could do without it for sure, but I do think that there are definitely going to be games where Asmor is stranded in your hand for at least a little bit, and it's going to feel kind of bad, you know? So I've like Bone Shards. I could see going down to like 2 copies. I've done that in some of my lists, but I don't know. I like 3. I think that it has like very good targets against a lot of the decks in the format. And if you're not getting clocked, then Trail is probably going to take over because you also just have these foods that gain life, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going to get nickel and dimed out by like burn or like.
And you have so many of them. Like that's the thing that really blows your mind is you have seemingly constant access to food once you survive those first 2 turns.
Yeah. So all you need is time, right? Because if you kill a threat, you get an extra turn or 2. That's untapped steps that you can use as mana to sacrifice those foods and like further bolster your life total and everything. So having some amount of interaction past Asmor is definitely good. I see the case for like, I just want Asmor all the time and, want to play Finale of Devastation. If you wanted to play like 2 copies in this deck, I'd be completely fine with that. Change the mana base, play Yavimaya, just make sure that it's castable. But Bone Shards has just been very solid for me. That plus Asmor has felt like enough because Trail can also dig for Asmor. So it's been fine.
That brings us very nicely to the final point about the main deck. Mana base, anything you want to say about it? It seems mostly straightforward, but any considerations you've had as you've been building out this mana base, anything you maybe want to do differently?
I'm playing a lot of lands. I'm playing 23. A lot of people playing Urza Saga are playing like 20, 21, and Saga is mostly a spell, Plus it's like a land that requires you to have other lands. So I don't know why you'd want to play such a low land count. I mean, there are certain decks, like if you're talking about Affinity or whatever, and they have a bunch of Springleaf Drums and Paradise Mantles, it's like, yeah, you can be shorter on lands, that's fine. But this deck just wants to make a land drop every single turn. And also Urza Saga, at least like the 4th one, I kind of consider as a spell. So I like 23 lands. I had a Nurturing Peat land because I was like, well, 23 is kind of high, but I don't want to flood. And then I just never cracked the Peat land because I'm just using my mana every turn. So I eventually cut that. And I'm just like playing, 19 lands and 4 sagas. And I'm very happy with that. I've had Yavimaya in and out of the deck. Without Finale, you don't need like double green for anything, really. It's like cast Gilded Goose, activate your other Gilded Goose or something. It's like, you don't really need the Yavimaya for that. And there is a cost to that, right? It like potentially fixes your opponent's mana. It allows them to tap their fetch lands for mana. And that, I remember a specific instance where that actually just cost me a game straight up because my opponent got to like cast Batterskull and then Cauldra, and they were at like 2 life or something with 2 fetch lands. So, it's like, do you need the Yavimaya in your mana base? If the answer is no, then don't play it. I've slowly increase the amount of basics I'm playing because I've gotten like Cleansing Wildfired and people are trying to like Blood Moon you and stuff. So, there is a certain point in which like your mana base is too good because I have, Verdant Catacombs and Pathways and Blooming Marshes. I like my mana is good, right? I can cast my spells. So if you can tone down on that to get more basics into your deck, you should probably do that if Blood Moon is a card that people are going to want against you.
Now, you are still playing the Urborg as of this moment of time, though, right?
Yeah, because like you actually end up wanting double, triple black a lot of the time with like Bone Shards, Asmo, stuff like that.
Got it.
So I think Urborg is good. And being able to, give Urza Saga some amount of colored mana utility is decent. And I think for this list specifically, Urborg is the right one. And then, sideboarding, it matters a little bit more too because we'll have some cheap black spells.
Yep. All right, let's go to the sideboard. Let me go ahead and give a quick read through here. This is what you're working with presently. I'm sure this changes on a near moment to moment basis, but we have 1 Shadow Spear, 1 Grist the Hunger Tide, 2 Engineered Explosives, 2 Foundation Breaker, 4 Thoughtseize, 1 Nile Spellbomb, 1 Pithing Needle, 2 Fatal Push, and 1 Kozilek Butcher of Truth. I kind of just want to run through each card in the list and have you talk a little bit about what you're using it for. You already hit on Shadow Spear to start with. Anything else you want to say about that card?
No, just the uses that I talked about. Lets you race aggro. Nile Spellbomb and Pithing Needle all kind of fall under the same umbrella because they're mostly Saga targets.
Yep.
Needle is like, I'm going to target your Planeswalker or preemptively an Oblivion Stone or something. And Nile Spellbomb is just graveyard hate against, Living End and Dredge, things like that. And those decks haven't seemed like that difficult. Like normally you would see more graveyard hate. Like you would actually have to like mean it to beat Dredge or whatever. But this deck can actually just beat Dredge playing a fair game. And this is just kind of to solidify things. But obviously if things change and like there's a graveyard deck that's a bad matchup, play more of them if you want to.
Yeah, your fair game doesn't really resemble typical fair games. That's the thing, is you are able to generate battlefield presence at a level that something like Dredge usually does. So I see no reason to go extra hard until the metagame becomes really, really graveyard dependent, which I think is tough because, as you mentioned, some people are trying to fight this deck via the graveyard. So it doesn't really work there, but the decks with the hard focus on graveyard are really getting squeezed by it.
All right. Real talk here. When you're playing against a deck, say like the Rakdos deck that I played against, or like Mardu, I'm probably going to board in like some removal, maybe some extra card advantage stuff. What do you think I'm taking out? I'm cutting like a Daredevil and a Troll King and a Cauldron Familiar and a Witch's Oven. And then it's just like, yeah, you brought in Ley Lines and now I have like Fatal Pushes and Grist or whatever.
Not going to line up well.
Yeah, your graveyard hate might be okay in game one. Like if you want to leyline me in game one, like, yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe that's not bad. It's way worse in post-board games.
Yeah, and we saw that same trend with Hogaak as well. It's just, you know what's coming. It's very easy to adapt to it.
Yeah.
All right, let's hit on Grist the Hunger Tide. This seems like a new addition for you. I've been keeping abreast of your changes throughout the week, and it seems like you're only getting excited about this card more recently. So tell me what you're trying to do with Grist.
So a week ago, when I first settled on basically like the main deck of this, like this core of like 54 cards or whatever, where I was like, this is really good. I just need a good sideboard plan. The thing that I kept running into was in post-board games, your opponent's going to have a problematic permanent and you're going to be activating Trail of Crumbs. And this came up in like the Niv matchup that I showed you, where I kept like Trail of Crumbsing past Bone Shards, right? And I'm just like, damn it. Like I just want to be able to take this. So I kept going through Gatherer and looking at like enters the battlefield and things like that, just trying to find a Trail of Crumbsable permanent that could also deal with my opponent's stuff. And I didn't find Grist through those searches because it's not like an ETB thing. It's just a thing that stays in play, right? And it eventually clicked for me when one of my Yawgmoth opponents played it against me and was like, oh, like this is a permanent and they used it to kill my Asmor, and then Asmor could not like retaliate and kill it in response, you know? And just at that point, it was like, I can see situations for sure in the mirror where it's like pretty bad, where if you play it and kill their Asmor, then they just attack it down because it's at low loyalty or whatever. But if it's just Grist versus their one thing, you're probably just winning the game straight up. So I could see a second copy of this. I've had a second copy at various points, and overall it just depends on like what you expect to play against. So I think that with my overall configuration, you don't need a ton of copies because I also have the engineered explosives to solve a lot of the same issues. And for EE specifically, it's just one of the best cards against the deck. And I feel like if you're ahead, well, then you're just crushing them. But if you're behind, you being behind usually looks like them having Construct, Asmo, and Food. And then EE just cleans it all up. And if they're ahead, they Asmord all your stuff, your Trail of Crumbsing, then EE is the perfect card. And it's so cheap too.
That all tracks. And I think the two cards play well together as well. Like you talked about getting them in the scenario where they're down to just one thing.
Yeah.
E kind of does the cleanup, and then Grist can be the hammer that just completely controls the board from that point.
Yeah. And obviously, if you have any food tokens built up, it's going to destroy those. But like I said, this is mostly a card that I'm using for situations where I'm very far behind. So if you're a parity or ahead, then, Explosives probably just locks it up, right? Because you can just set it on whatever is going to cause you the most problems. But when you're behind, it is absolutely the best card in the mirror match.
I wonder if this is the way forward for the decks that are trying to challenge this mode of playing. If there's supposed to be more artifact-based control decks that can really leverage engineered explosives and get in scenarios where they can do it multiple times, right? Like certainly there's Academy Ruins, Emery, all these ways to just loop engineered explosives. That might be the way to go for control decks.
Yeah, and I don't even think that you need to loop them necessarily. I think that just having a couple in your sideboard is just completely fine because it's also just good against Dragon's Rage Channeler
Right.
and all these other decks. Another reason to play explosives is because it's good against the Crashing Footfalls too.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of play with it, a decent amount, and like certainly more so in control decks. But one of the decks that I've been trying to nail down is like a Ren and 6 Urza Saga control deck, and there's Charlie the Banana King on Magic Online, who is, I believe, Julian Felix Fleury, if you remember that name.
I do.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I recognize the name.
So he was the one that like cut the ultimatums from the Omnath deck and just played like Cobra Counterspells Ugin.
Yeah.
And won one of the SCG tournaments.
Okay.
So he's playing like a 4-color Ren and 6 Urza Saga control deck on Magic Online. Is like 3-1 to a bunch of preliminaries. He got 12th in a challenge or something, and his deck looks solid. But I think I'm trying to look at like other dimensions, But he's been playing like a couple copies of explosives in his deck, and you can't get it with Saga, and he doesn't have Academy Ruins, but like it will pump your constructs if you play it out on 1 or 0 or whatever, and just let it sit there.
Sure.
So I think it's perfectly fine to have in his deck. And again, it's one of the best cards against food. And he also has like Natural State or Nature's Claim, rather. He had that in his first versions. I think he eventually went to Wear Tear in his main deck. He has like 2 copies. So
okay.
He's clearly very cognizant of that matchup.
As you should be right now. More Trail of Crumbsable answers to permanents coming up next with Foundation Breaker. Specifically, what is this targeting? Just catch-all for any enchantments, artifacts that might give you a hard time?
Yeah, pretty much. I had
a lot of Enchantress around right now, I've noticed.
Yeah, I played against Enchantress in one of the tournaments I played in, and I beat it like kind of easily because I drew like some Nature's Claims, right? And fatal pushes and things like that, and just kept them off balance. Now with Explosives and Foundation Breaker instead of Nature's Claim, I think my matchup's even better. But Foundation Breaker is like another card that I wanted for the mirror. Like I wanted Nature's Claim to like tag a cookbook on 1 or a saga on 2 or something. But again, I wanted things that were findable with trails. And now I have this thing that's like a lot slower, but heading into like the mid to late game, I can find it off trail and use it to blow stuff up. And if you evoke it, you can sack it to Witch's Oven if you want to or whatever. So there's like a little bit of added value there.
Yeah, nice.
But it is a little slow, so it may or may not continue to live in the deck or not. I need to get a few more reps in the mirror.
Okay. A card that I imagine will probably always be around for this deck's existence. 4 Thoughtseize in the sideboard. Where are we looking for these? How vital are they?
I've gone up and down. Ultimately, I'm just living up right now because the decks that kind of go over the top of you, Thoughtseize is just good against all of them versus like trying to do something specific for Amulet or playing Void Mirror for the Cascade decks or whatever. It's just like they're prepared for this, some decks like the Cascade decks bring in like Leyline of Sanctity too, it's like, yeah, they might have an answer for this, but like, this is the best thing. It's just the best catch-all.
Makes sense to me. And maybe the best catch-all removal spell, Fatal Push. Any thoughts to this being like 4th Bone Shards potentially, or does this just have to be Fatal Push?
I've had more, I've had less. I like the instant speed. One of the bad matchups is the Yawgmoth deck, and Fatal Push is the best card to have against them, whereas Bone Shards is a sorcery. So it's kind of awkward. But yeah, just, instant speed, turning on Delirium is trivial. Comically, or not, Revolt, whatever it is trivial with all the foods and ovens and, whatever. So I think that could kind of be whatever, and maybe explosives is a good enough catch-all against like Dragon's Rage Channeler, where you don't even need Fatal Push. Not enough people are playing Yawgmoth to necessarily warrant a bunch of them. I had 3 before and like still lost to Yawgmoth, so it's not even like it locks it up for you or whatever.
Right.
But I don't know. I could take it or leave it. It's one of those cards that just kind of like rounds out the sideboard, fills out my plans, is overall just generally solid. But if I find something very specific that I need or want, it could very easily go.
Yeah, it seems like a trend throughout your sideboard where it's just like your core is so good and your game plan's so diversified that you're just looking for these very smooth catch-alls that you can slot in various matchups and have a plan against everyone, basically, as opposed to, oh, I need a hammer for this matchup, or I need a way to play around this counter hate. It's always just about what's efficient, what can I slot into this deck seamlessly and still keep my overall plan together.
Yeah, that could change. Maybe next week I decide that this deck is still good, but then there are 3 decks that are very bad matchups that are on, polarizing ends of the spectrum. And then maybe Thoughtseize is not a great catch-all answer. Maybe you do need like Void Mirror and Leyline of the Void and Fatal Push or something, and then I'll go that direction. But right now, a lot of the decks are doing similar things to where I think that you can have these kind of like generalized catch-all answers, which is pretty nice because it makes building the sideboard pretty easy. And then, I found things that were permanents to find off trail, which makes my game plan even more cohesive. So
yep.
I like the sideboard for this moment in time. You know what I mean? And in a week or so, maybe it has to get ugly again because the format changes.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the first exception to the catch-all. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. This is for that transformational plan, right?
Oh,
yeah. Just a hard ramp deck. And
against Show and Tell.
Yeah, sounds good.
No, it's just for mill. It could be a Gaze Blessing. There's not really any argument, I suppose, that if you are able to, if you draw a Kozilek, you can discard it to Cookbook to shuffle your deck or whatever. Like that's better than what Blessing can provide. If you draw it, you cycle it. So I think I like it better than the alternative. But yeah, I mean, mill can be a tough matchup because they have like a pretty consistent like turn 5 kill and you don't, especially through whatever disruption they have. So I think you need something to help that matchup because that's another deck like Amulet that just kind of like goes over the top of you, and you don't have anything you can really do about it. Thoughtseize helps, maybe, like the Fatal Pushes help to kill the Crabbies and stuff, but you really want a Kozilek to kind of solidify it, especially since their surgicals just actually have targets against you, and you can try and like incentivize them to surgical things if you want to, just to clear the way for Kozilek.
Sure. All right. So let's go into specific matchups, talk a little bit about the matchup spread. And I want to start before we get into micro matchups and you tell us your specific experience against the various decks of the format. I just want to talk on a macro perspective. So this is the Hogaak. This is the best deck. I don't think there's a ton of debate around that fact. We already discussed you can't just play these spot hate cards. They're not going to do enough. So I'm going to start to look for macro trends. What are the ways you can challenge this broadly? And I think you mentioned one, go over the top, do bigger things. The things I certainly don't want to do right now is play traditional control into this, where you can grind me out with your Trail of Crumbs, or play other mid-range. I think this is just a better mid-range engine. And along the same lines, aggro's tough. Like I want to play aggro in a certain way if I think I'm going to be safe against this very robust removal engine you have in your deck, along with all this life gain. It has to look a certain way before I'm playing aggro. So those are the decks I'm not super interested in right now. The things I am interested in, going over the top, stuff like Amulet still seems very promising to me.
Amulet's great.
The one area I think is underexplored, stack-based combo. Like this deck is mostly about playing on the battlefield and just skip it. Just don't deal with it. Find your Ad Nauseam, find your Storm. Probably not either one of those decks, because I don't think either is particularly powerful right now. But in some ways, Mill is that. Like Mill is stack-based combo. And maybe there's other looks at stack-based combo you could look at, where the only disruption really you're facing on the other side here, Four Thoughtseize, maybe Spellbomb matters sometimes, maybe Foundation Breaker matters sometimes. But for the most part, you're going to get to do your thing pretty consistently.
Yeah. I mean, we're still trying to present like a reasonably fast clock with like Urza Saga or Feasting Troll King, but you just like, I don't know, sigh, and like the gust of wind from that just like blows the house of cards down, right? Like it just,
yeah,
you just deal with like the first reasonable threat and you have so much time. So I think Ad Nauseum or some sort of like Thassa's Oracle combo deck, like you picked up Profane Tutor and maybe that's good enough to make the deck reasonable. Enchantress can in theory lock you out, but the more things like Engineer Explosives you have, the worse it gets for them. And I think that if they're just fighting against like Nature's Claim, then they can eventually just assemble everything, right, and beat you up pretty badly. But once you start having mass removal for enchantments, then I don't think there's really anything you could do. Aggro, anything with 1-drops that goes wide, lightning bolts, just try and burn me out before I have time to actually stabilize with food and stuff. I think that looks reasonable. There's a lot of different versions of that. A lot of Ragavans, a lot of Dragon's Rage Channelers. There's less like raw prowess than there was pre-MH2, and maybe that has to change because a lot of these decks are like, I'm going to play a Ragavan and then like counter all your spells, and I'm just like Cauldron Familiar or whatever. They're like, damn it,
GG.
Yeah. So I think that there are prowess lists with like Dragon's Rage Channeler that do provide a fast enough clock. Maybe they have some disruption, but they have the threat of burning you out and attacking you for like 10 on turn 3, and like that's pretty scary.
And how about the staples of pre MH2 modern? So I'm talking things like humans, and I already said my opinion on like the Jeskai control decks, but all those things that have been around forever that we still see people playing. And, if you want to talk about Stoneforge Mystic decks, which seem to have had some success, picking up Kaldra Complete was a big deal for those decks. I think we talked about why last week.
Yeah.
How do you fare against that stuff?
Stoneforge is solid because of Kaldra, because that puts you on a clock and it's not something that you can realistically deal with. So I don't know what the best way to build it is. Like you could look at Ragavan counterspell type of stuff. I think that's fine, but like ultimately a little bit slow, and they don't have the right type of disruption a lot of the times. And the white-black versions are like also kind of slow. They have more disruption, but it's like, I don't know, Vanishing Verse type of stuff. Like Kai's Guile's okay, Voidwalker's okay. Discard is okay depending on what your hand is or whatever. So maybe that's the best way to do it, is just like try and slow them down and then Stoneforge them, I guess. But it's definitely not a lock, because I could also just like Bone Shards your Stoneforge Mystic, and then what are you doing?
Sure.
I wonder if Heliod is a bad matchup. Actually, it seems like it probably would be. Like, obviously, if you get Asmor down, then you're fine.
You control their battlefield pretty easily.
Right, but like you don't have a lot of ways to interact, and their infinite life is tough to do on Magic Online, obviously. But assuming you're in real life or whatever, then you can't really do anything against that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's in real life presently. I'm certainly not in real life. I guess there are modern tournaments going on out there.
Yeah, I was mostly speaking for the future,
Yeah, well, if there is a future for this deck, which I think remains to be seen, I don't know how long this metagame is going to last. And, I would laugh at myself saying this if it was 3 years ago, but it's just kind of how we do things now. We move more quickly, we ban things more quickly, and the appetite is there for a banning if things feel out of control. And some of the things this deck does feel very out of control. And along those lines, do you see other ways to do this type of stuff? I'm starting to see some Mox Amber stuff out there, which is, more explosive ostensibly. Like it can do the thing sooner. I kind of like doing more and for a longer game with the Trail of Crumbs approach.
I do too.
Mox Amber is interesting. It's a powerful Magic card.
I think a lot of people are going to argue that is potentially better than this, and I don't really see why.
And as it would be like Emery, Urza, Mox Amber, probably like Ragavan in the mix would be my guess.
Yeah. Like Devin O'Donnell, Dean Wake has been streaming it the last couple days, and like it's funny to watch these games play out where it's like, wow, your deck is so clunky, but then he keeps winning, and then keeps like declaring that the deck is busted, which it may or may not be, whatever. But at the same time, it's like, well, my deck does the same thing, but like more consistent and cleaner. So I'm not really seeing what the advantage is. Like, I guess you're blue, so you have Hercule's Recall in your sideboard or something, which is like a good card, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I don't know. I don't get it. It's like, I watch the games play out and I'm just like, yeah, this is not on the same level as Trail of Crumbs.
Any other approaches then that have caught your eye as maybe potentially being on the same level?
Dude, I'm working on some stuff right now.
Okay. Sneak preview or?
God, I don't even know. I'm not even sure like how to describe what is going on in my head. So basically, I want to try playing Ren 6. And in which shell would it be better in? I'm not sure. So like I have some sketches with Ren, Asmor, Emery, and then some Mox Ambers. So it's like, okay, you're a teamer. Where do you go from here? Well, you play Cookbook, obviously. You play Bobble to go with Emery.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, what do I want the rest of the deck to be? And I don't really know. But basically, like everything that we've talked about, Finale, Trail, all the random targets, more artifact stuff, like Thought Monitor, like these could all potentially be in the deck. And I'm not sure. The thing that is really hitting me right now in regards to Modern and Magic Online is basically like choice paralysis, where that like I wanted to play humans and I did. I wanted to play green black and I did, and I tried a few other things, and now I'm just like, okay, well now I have 20 things on the docket. Where do I go? And in the meantime, I'm still like building new decks. So
now I want you to, for a second, imagine you're having all of these thoughts and all these things interest you, and you want to build all these awesome looking decks with MH2, and you haven't been able to get to your freaking computer for 2 weeks straight since the release of this set. And I just want you to imagine the turmoil that has consumed my soul over the past 2 weeks as I have to just watch these sweet decks not only be played, but evolve. All these things I could be contributing to and having a hand in and thinking about, I've just been completely shut out of. And I am going berserk. But as I record today, Gerry, I am on my old computer. It's set up in my new house. I'm using my old microphone. We're so close to being able to play games of Magic.
Brian, the last time I checked, Walmart has a 7-day full return policy, no questions asked.
Well, you could have told me that a week ago. Now it's too late because I have my computer back. So we're so close. Basically, I thought I was going to be able to spend yesterday just grinding out games. It didn't work out. I was dealing with many broken objects, including a broken PS5. So pour one out for me.
Brutal.
I actually got a PS5 and now it's destroyed. So if anyone has a PS5, hit me up.
Who is this moving company? Put them on blast real quick.
Gerry, see, here's the thing. I would love to do that. But I saw a very good Twitter post quite some time ago that said all humans, basically once they cross the threshold of having like 1,000 followers on Twitter, are incapable of resisting the allure to put a company on blast and to call in their clout, and will always turn to the dark side and do it. And I've probably done it before, honestly. But since I saw that post, I'm trying not to go that route.
If I've done it, I've only done it like twice max.
That's my guess too. That's my guess.
Here's the thing. Whenever I see someone like, I'm going to put this person on blast because I think they're the person I see do it the most. And also I don't think that they're going to listen to this podcast. But whenever something like went wrong with one of Tom Martell's flights or whatever, he'd be like, hey, at United, blah, blah, blah. And it's never like, just at United so that only people who follow like United and Tom Martell can see it.
It's a blasting.
Yeah, he made sure to do it so that like all of his followers could see it, right? And that's the type of stuff where I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? And I can't remember a single time where I've ever done that, because whenever I see someone do that, I'm just like, that is so cringy. But I don't want you to just like air your grievances. I want anyone who is like going to potentially go with this moving company to not do it.
I know.
It's not like, yeah, United operates 1 million flights a day or whatever. So some of your crew are going to be good, some are going to be bad, depending on where you are, right? Like,
right.
It's this moving company, which
I think that's the same thing with this moving company.
They're big enough.
I think they're big enough.
Okay.
And I also think I'm trying to be as level-headed about this as I possibly can. I think these people had an extremely difficult job. Like, they had to pack every single belonging I've accumulated over my 38 years of life.
Dude, that sounds like their job. And
it is. And they got paid a lot of money to do it. So,
well, the people specifically probably did not get all that money, right?
Okay, fair point. Yeah.
So, like, yes, you can argue it both ways, where it's like, oh yeah, like, this is definitely a hard day for the moving company or whatever, or the movers who were assigned to your move, and that sucks.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's like, you can't really get mad at a person for not doing their job well when they're almost certainly getting exploited by the owners of that company, right?
Well, let's just play out the scenario. Like, if I put them on blast, who's going to get in trouble?
So I get that, but at the same time, it's like you're dealing with someone's like entire livelihood, right? Like, so it's your things, man. That's like so personal.
It is. And honestly, like, the PS5 certainly sucks. The harder consequences of all this is they broke some stuff of my wife's that is irreplaceable. Like,
heirlooms.
her grandmother's stuff, and a boat that it's like one of those miniature model ships that her grandfather made by hand. And both have since passed away. So it's not like you can recover those things or bring it back to them and say, hey, can you fix this? So that's where it's really hard. And I'm really upset. The other stuff is just dollars. And at some point, it might just be made right, honestly. Like, their insurance policy might pay out. And while I can't get another PlayStation 5 because they're impossible to get, at some point, I will have another one and it'll be fine. But that stuff does make me upset. I just don't think there's anything to be done, though. Like, even if I put them on blast, I didn't say, unless I put a specific set of movers on blast, then you're not being saved from anything, because there's probably 20 crews that this moving company uses, if not way more than that.
Sure. And I thought if it was like a smaller company, it's like, well, these people obviously don't care about your stuff. Find a different company. Maybe the other company will, or whatever. But
and it wasn't like just complete negligence. It was just like small things that didn't make sense. Like, why would you pack a PlayStation 5 with all the stuff plugged in and then put things on top of it so there's pressure on the HDMI cable and it just snaps the stupid thing off? Like, it's such an obvious outcome with the way they packed it. And
that it doesn't make any sense, man.
It does not. But that's it. That's it for my griping about moving concerns. Overall, things are good, and the new house is pleasant. I'm posting lots of beautiful nature pics that I hope everyone's enjoying. Had some turkeys in my yard yesterday.
Oh, I didn't see the turkeys yet.
Oh, you should take a look at them. Like a big tom turkey, which is the name for a male turkey, and he brought 2 of his female friends along to the yard with him. So,
damn.
That was cool, and beautiful birds all over the place. So only minimal complaining on my part. It'll all get straightened out eventually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel bad for your wife and all of her stuff. Like you said, your things is like, it's just money. It can get taken care of. It can get replaced. But, like, her stuff can't. That fucking blows.
It does blow, but we'll get through it. And then eventually we'll recover with some games of Magic Online, which I'm sure will ease all of her ails.
In the meantime, Walmart, check it out.
Deal. Wait, why are we advertising for Walmart? That's terrible.
No, because you can just basically borrow a computer from them for a week and return it.
Oh, so we're advertising a scam.
I mean, it's not a scam. It's their policy.
Okay. We're advertising their policy. A generous policy. Thank you, Walmart. Free 7 days of computers for anyone who wants them.
Yeah.
Go get yours.
Yeah. All you got to do is, put up the $1,000 or whatever for a week. You'll get it back. Mm-hmm. It's fine.
You can do that on credit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, even better.
Right.
And then You return your computer and then just go right back to the back and rebuy the same one and just keep doing it.
Just rent a computer forever?
Yeah, in perpetuity.
I feel like at some point they must have some limitation on this.
I don't know.
Or maybe it doesn't matter enough that they...
Yeah, who cares?
They just don't care. Yeah. I read a Reddit post some time ago about someone who was using GameStop as their bank. They were basically just pre-ordering every game.
Oh, then canceling?
And then canceling and getting the money back. And they said it was more efficient than using a bank because sometimes they wanted the games. They didn't have to worry about like going to the bank because there's a GameStop close to them. So I don't know. Kind of checked out.
But why would you not just use a bank?
GameStop was more convenient. It was there. They were already in GameStop.
Okay.
Look, I'm not here to judge. I've done a lot of backwards things myself. If this person wants to bank with GameStop, so be it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like, what if you need money and the GameStop's closed?
GameStop's closed.
You can't go to the GameStop ATM.
Or like GameStop goes out of business. It seems like you might be in some trouble.
Yeah, that's fair too. I doubt they're going to pay you out. They might give you the games when they come out, but.
Right.
Anyway, last little stew I got going here, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I want to do Ren 6 with Urza Saga, but
yeah,
I also want my constructs to not be tiny. So I have Asmor Cookbook because I think that those are just genuinely good cards, right?
Yes.
So then where do you go from there? Well,
artifact lands? Can you do that?
Oh my god, they're so bad. They ETB tapped, Brian.
There's Darksteel Citadel if you really want to cast that Ren 6.
Yeah, how do you cast Ren 6, man? You already have 4 colorless lands.
Yeah.
So, did you know that there's a 0 mana cycler that is not Street Wraith?
There's Edge of Autumn.
There is Edge of Autumn.
Is that what you're talking about?
So you can play Flagstones. And you can play Elvish Reclaimer. And then you can play Dryad to kind of mitigate the mana cost of Saga, right? And Ren 6 allows you to make more land drops off of Dryad. Maybe you're using all of this mana to Trail of Crumbs. Maybe you have like 2 copies of Eladamri's Call. And since you have like Ren 6 rebuying lands, maybe you don't need Daredevil, right? But like you could Eladamri's Call for like the 1 Daredevil to serve your 4 cookbooks, or you could get either a Street Wraith or an Asmor, depending on which one you need. If you're playing Mishra's Bauble just to pump your constructs mostly, you could play like a Luris as a draw engine.
Look, I like all of this, but I'm concerned you're starting to sound sort of like me. Like you haven't accomplished all that much in any of this, and it's just a bunch of like really good cards that smush together. Like all of your points make sense. They all combine really well. You also just have a deck right now that literally can make a tremendous battlefield off a stupid witch's oven, and that's enough. Like you can do everything with that. So why are you putting all these complicated pieces together?
Have you ever like come to a mostly correct conclusion? You're like, oh, that doesn't sound that bad. I'll do that, right? But then you find out that there's like a strictly better thing.
That is my deck building process in a nutshell. Yes.
Right. So like, why would you stop at potentially second best? Like I said, if I had a big tournament, I'd play green black until I figure it out. In the meantime, I'm going to keep trying to break it.
Well, I support you in that. I think you've done it once already. I do think you have the best list for this archetype. And
I mean, don't pat me on the back too much, man, because this was like not really my doing. It was like I saw people playing all of these cards, and then I just chose the best ones.
That you just described Magic deck building, basically. I mean, that's what the process is, and you extrapolated through lots and lots of data and found the points you liked and put it together. That's what we do. I don't know how else to phrase it. And look, that's part of the reason why I don't try to seek credit for ideas anymore, right? Like if I come up with something and then someone changes it by 2 cards, they've changed it and they may have reached the conclusion independently, and that's fine. I don't need someone to assign a deck to me. That doesn't make any sense anymore.
Okay,
this is what the process looks like.
This is what I don't want to take credit for. I do not want to take credit for the idea of like Oval Chase Daredevil and like Asmor plus Cookbook plus Saga and Green Black.
No.
I will happily take credit for I have the best plans. because
sure,
I do.
That's all I'm trying to give you credit for.
Okay, not the deck. I didn't build the deck, but I figured out what the best plans are, and that's. I think if someone like built another very good deck, my deck would be better because I have better plans, right? Like maybe they don't have the best plans, but in the meantime, I'm also gonna like keep trying to improve on it, and I don't want to say like I need to fix things or whatever, but like maybe there's a better backup plan than Trail, right? Because like Trail is doing the job and it's doing it well, but it might not be the best thing.
I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Keep me posted. Keep our Discord posted. We'll keep the podcast posted. We'll come back next week, probably with some more modern stuff, although we are getting close to another preview season. It's rapidly coming upon us, so we'll see how much more modern we can do.
No, that's cool because I think that might be reaching a point of burnout,
Okay. You've done your games.
Well, not me, dude. I'm still going hard. I honestly don't know when I'm going to burn out. And then, it's possible that they like ban something. And then it's like, okay, we get to start the process all over again, right?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I feel like I missed this process, but I'll get in on the next one where we can really explore the rest of what's in Image 2.
I do feel like if there aren't any big tournaments, there might not be a reason to ban stuff because the proliferation for this stuff is not that high on Magic Online. Like you look at, the challenge results and it's like, there are sagas in a decent amount of decks, but it's not just like an overwhelming number, and certainly like Golgari by itself is a very small portion of the winner's metagame. So, maybe if there was like a pro tour or like a string of Grand Prix or a PTQ season or whatever, and people had a reason to really like hammer down and play the best stuff, then that's typically when bannings occur, right? It's not like everyone's just splashing around doing the things that they like, everything's 3% of the metagame. Who cares? Let it roll.
True. Well, we'll see what this week's challenges and events bring, and then we'll check back in next week.
Game!
Good luck.